Welcome to the UDL Principles and Instructional Design 3-part mini podcast series with Amanda, Ivy, Gabby, and Jordan. Throughout this mini episode, we share our thoughts and opinions on knowledge equity and how we can relate that to instructional design.
Is knowledge found, created, extracted, or something else?
It can be like any one of those things. It just depends on what you're learning in the process. Because I was reading through that question, I was like, I don't know, because I feel like you could get something from each different one. So you gain knowledge in so many different ways that I feel like it doesn't come just from one.
Like knowledge is like combination from like different sources, both in like school and like when you're growing up, you gain like certain like values and like principles from the people around you, from the environment you grew up in. So it's like it's something that is both like extracted and created.
We learn from lived experience, from like academic kind of context, like university, as well as just like going through life. So I feel like it's all like transferred and created along the way. So I feel the same.
The experience, I think you can learn in the classroom from experience and making mistakes, like all of those points that you guys all pointed out, I really agree with.
Is one kind of knowledge or knowing more important than the other? More valued by who or what groups?
They learn from like everything around them, like landscapes, the water, then mainly the environment, and then like learning from talking to people around you. And
knowledge versus knowing, like for me, I think that there's like a sense of confidence in knowing, whereas knowledge you're like you just have. So I don't know if this is right, like just taking the words at the context that they are, like knowledge is something that you I guess have, and then knowing is like the confidence to put it into action. I don't know, like I'm trying to like take a step back and just like think of the terms and look at it like holistically.
It says like knowledge is like accumulated from the outside and we can control what comes into our mind, but like knowing is like they compare it to like wind that it can't really be gathered or like controlled, or it just like it's already there.
Kind of relates to that expert dynamic. Like you're never in Indigenous culture, you're never really an expert. Like you're always looking up to the credibility that you are inherently worth. So I think like same as Amanda's point, like knowing is kind of like that humble kind of piece. Like I don't even know how to describe it, but even in looking at the Indigenous systems of knowledge diagram, like seeing that respect and responsibility and reciprocity like underlines the entire system of knowledge. That's really fascinating to me.
How does the person or group of people's worldview impact how they view knowledge or knowing? For example, like relationality and peoplehood as underpinning of Indigenous knowledge systems. What you are exposed to when you were growing up, and like being around like the elders and like the other people around you, that's where you like gain your knowledge from. That affects your worldview when you were growing up, kind of.
Yeah, kind of like the nature versus nurture aspect of it. I like from the point of like Indigenous people and like how they grow up and like the knowing aspect from them, especially if they like engaged in like Indigenous practices and stuff, versus like someone like myself who didn't grow up that, then I'd have a different way of knowing and knowledge versus them, because they like I grew up not necessarily valuing the same things, or like my family didn't. So then my way of knowing like the land versus like how Indigenous people know the land is different. Like because I come from like an oil and gas family, so when I like see land, you see it almost as an opportunity to make money, and then like Indigenous people look at it as like something that's sacred and something that you need to take care of. And like there's that divide, which obviously as I've gotten older I've noticed like the stark difference in like how the way I grew up is like pretty flawed in a lot of ways.
In one of the articles that I was talking about exactly that, like talking about climate change and how the kind of conflict of interest
Mhm.
impacts that, because just like you said, Jordan, people might see it as opportunity, but like in indigenous culture, they have like knowledge holders because they were able to like upkeep the land for centuries to come.
Mhm.
So yeah, I really relate to that. I feel like that kind of like clash of values also impacts like knowledge versus knowing, because someone could
Mhm.
say oil and gas as like facts, as knowledge, whereas
Mhm.
the indigenous knowledge might be considered as like knowing because they were.
Yeah.
I can't quite like articulate that, but yeah,
Oh, I like that.
like knowledge is more concrete, like Amanda was saying, or
Oh.
it's also flexible, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, and like knowing, because it's not like a tangible thing that you can really point to. It's
Mhm.
like knowledge is kind of like, I feel like, the building blocks to the knowing. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I think like knowing is kind of similar with intuition, I guess. How would your positionally race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status impact your role as an instructional designer or as a facilitator?
Your experience, like, I think, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but like, I think we all have a different lens in the world, and how we have developed, experienced things is how, like, it's shaped us into the people that we are. And so we may not even realize that the way that we've been impacted by our positionality, um, and it's just how we interact at this point. I don't know.
Mhm.
I feel like this really connects to the previous question, in that how does a person's or group of people's worldview impact like knowledge versus knowing? Because just like Amanda said, like you have different lenses that you possess throughout life and then acquire like as you go through life experiences.
Mhm.
But I feel like as like a woman and person of color, I definitely have a different lens on life versus say like a white cis hetero man. So it's completely different. And as an instructional designer, it's important to be cognizant of that lens, because if we kind of impose our solutions onto a group of people or others, it might come off as like that same historical white savior kind of
Mhm.
Yes.
concept. So I think, and also as a facilitator, being aware of all those different lenses, like we mentioned in the past as well, about all the invisible barriers that everyone faces, and we don't see that on the outside. So as a facilitator, being aware of that, and um, even leaving space to be accessible and inclusive also.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree.
Yeah, I can completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead,
that's kind
Jordan.
of exactly what I was thinking when I like read that question. I was like what ways it all like it made me think of like intersectionality and everything along the lines of that. And then I was like, what in that way, like if I was like, say, went into like get my master's or whatever and started to teach after, like what about that, like where would I maybe find struggles? And I was thinking it'd probably just be like for the only like thing that I deal with would be just being like growing up female and viewing the world through that and like how that would affect things. But like I feel like I would have to be aware of like all the different lenses as Ivy was saying and the invisible barriers because I haven't gone through so many different um ways of life. Like there's so many different pathways that like everyone takes that like I would have to be like super aware of being like a white cisgendered woman. So I feel like I would be have to be like very aware of the way I approach different situations based on like the privilege and stuff that I've grown up with.
Important to, since like when we grow up, we gain more knowledge and like become more aware of like different lenses from different people from
Mhm.
like different cultural backgrounds. So
Mhm.
as designers, we are like our main goal kind of is to be more empathic with everyone around us and create solutions for everyone. So that as like a facilitator, I think it's important to be aware of those.
Like two things that stood out to me was the empathy, like which is a huge part of design, and the reflection. Like I feel like to be to like be aware and reflect on how your positionality is like that has a lot of reflection that's required on like on yourself, right? And how like and then there's also like a reflection on how you impact others, and there's just so it's like reflection and empathy of it all, and those two really go hand in hand in my opinion, because I think to be able to reflect you have to have an empathetic view on other people.
I agree.
Yeah, I feel like that reflection can't start as long if you're like not a super empathetic person. Empathy and reflection, like, that is like I feel like
It goes hand in hand.
yeah.
I just found one of my notes that talked about the professor that wrote a scientific paper about the jute marrow. Did you all see that?
Oh yeah, yes.
I don't
That's
think
like
so.
the
I had to search up what it is. It's kind of like it looks like a mint leaf, but apparently it has like these nutrients that could solve like food insecurity and poverty, but it's kind of like marginalized because it's not like the norm Western type of food. So it just like is kind of mind-boggling because even though it could solve these like world problems, it's almost like sidelined for some reason. Maybe because it doesn't fit in like Western culture and it's too or it almost is like relates to the whitewashing kind of because
it's very Eurocentric.
because even traditional Chinese medicine was looked down upon before, but now Guasha like blew up over TikTok and everything. So I kind of feel like knowledge can be, I want to say stolen, but like almost assimilated into Western culture.
Yes.
Appropriated.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just.
Yeah.
I think it's called like academic racism, right?
Yeah. Isn't that funny how that works? Like people from like different countries will practice like their like traditional like whatever it is, and then it like comes to like America and stuff, and then it's like completely whitewashed, not even like there's not like the true essence of what it actually is there. Now it's just for basically for profit.
It's really sad.
It's disgusting, really. It's like
it is.
It's and it's interesting because I'm seeing an underlining capitalism there too, which
It is.
we talked about this last week. The worst part is that it's done to people that are not like that don't have the same kind of privilege, and it's usually white people that are doing this, which is the worst part.
It's like I was reading something that Kelsey provided, and it was basically saying that like there's like a power to the knowledge that's created in like a Western society, that this, even if like indigenous ways of like knowledge and knowing can be as correct as like Western science and all that, ours is still like put at like superiority. It's like basically this is the facts, and anything around this is like basically not as true or not as factual. And it's just like, I don't know, to them, to anyone or whatever you grew up with, that is your beliefs and that feels true to you. Like there's like certain things you can even go from like family to family, like ways you grow up with your family versus like your best friend's family. There's going to be different, like two different ways of knowing of like different things. So you could be doing something one way and the other family does something this way, and then you guys are like talking about it and you're like, oh, we do it this way, we do it that way, but like there's no wrong to that. Like two different ways to bake a cake, but if they still taste good, they still taste good. Neither of them are wrong.
There's no wrong. It's just like different perspective, basically. Both are correct.
That's actually interesting how like capitalism and colonialism are really at the root of all of these topics, because without capitalism, indigenous ways of knowing wouldn't be sidelined, and like even people of colors, like approaches to disease, to just like health overall, and knowledge is completely like out of reach almost, because in university it's really only benefiting those that can afford it. And even as with a lot of, like Canada, we have access to all of these resources, but someone that doesn't or that can't afford higher education doesn't have access to that knowledge. So it kind of relates to that podcast in that there's almost a gatekeeping of knowledge.
You know, it's interesting too, because I think you were touching on this as well, is that those people that are in like a different social class, like in lower middle, they all have different knowledge and skills and lived experiences that, you know, like, you know, it makes me think, when you brought that up, it makes me think of, you know, those really entitled people that you see on planes. They're like, my dad owns $1 billion company. You're like, oh my gosh, you have no experience. Like you have no knowledge of how to socialize. Like, I mean, that's not the same as learning in a classroom, but they have a different knowledge skill set. And I think that it's just that they've been able to navigate social situations differently.
My dad, so he never went to post-secondary, but he finished high school in the Philippines. So technically he's considered like uneducated, but he taught me so many life skills, and to be courageous, how to fish and crab in Vancouver. So I feel like he has so much, like a wealth of knowledge that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. And it also relates to his like ability to speak English, because he didn't go to post-secondary, he can't quite like articulate his words in English, because sometimes there aren't words in Tagalog that translate into English, and likewise for other languages. So I feel like the idea of being educated is so loose, because like we have different life experience that we can learn from everyone else too.
I know, and I feel like that's like where the empathy piece comes in, where like as long as you like apply empathy, you can learn so much from like anyone, no matter what, no matter where you are in like life, no matter if you're like rich or poor, or a male or a female or non-binary, whatever your life is. As long as you go into like a situation like that, then you could just like learn everything. Like literally, people are your like encyclopedias. Like just go to them for knowledge. Like it's just like so cool how that works, you know?
That is such a cool, like, I love that. That is like that, being open and empathetic and being open to learning from other people. That's perfect. Like
that's like
just being open.
Which I think that's like one of the things that, like, I don't want to say everyone's like this, but my dad, he's a white male. He used to teach my prof used to say he was the Trump of psychiatric nursing. It's very accurate. It's an accurate description. But I think that my dad was labeled like that because he was not open to learning from other people's experiences. And so it made him a very closed off person that wasn't open to or empathetic to other people and their learning experiences. And I think that that's like something that you have to be an instructor. Like, I think this kind of ties into the next question as well. Like, you just need to be very open to new experientions. I had a very similar experience. Like, when I first came back to university, I was like, oh, well, I felt like I kind of had a chip on my shoulder. I was like, well, I've been in the workforce. I'm so like, I know what I'm doing. And then I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm coming here to learn. To be like, I already know everything is not the mentality that you go to university with. And the moment I realized that, I was like, oh, I feel like I get so much more out of my education now that I'm like, I'm actually here to learn, which is like kind of an obvious thing, I guess. But it took it was a learning experience where I was like, oh, actually, I need to be open to this, you know?
Exactly. That's such a good point, because I feel like some situations you can go in like thinking like a certain way about something, and then you're like whoa, like what am I, like who am I to go into this situation thinking I know more than I do?
Actually, I'm reading a book by Brene Brown, and it's talking about vulnerability, and it was exactly that, like realizing that you don't know everything, and that even unexpected learning experiences can come from anywhere throughout uni, no matter who you are, is super cool. And I remember from one of the articles, it mentioned the risk of being wrong, and it relates to vulnerability
Yeah.
because it's talking about even if you're wrong, you've learned something new and rounded out your, like it's almost like a holistic point of knowledge too. So I really love that, the fact that you came into it and then um, like within the program you learned even more. So
I was reading that article too, and it was like basically you have to be okay with like humility and like because that just comes along with it. Like that's part of like the learning process of life. And if you're like always trying to like circle around that and never actually like dive into it, like what are you actually gonna learn? I feel like the most ignorant people I've ever met in my life are the ones that are so unwilling to be wrong or not willing to be wrong. And then I always find those are the hardest people to be around. But like the people that like are able to be like, oh yeah, like I'm totally wrong. Like let me see hear your perspective. You're like, oh, okay, you actually want to listen to me. You want to learn from me. It makes you feel good about yourself, and then makes them feel good because they're just like, I don't know, creates that bonding experience like through communication in people.
mentor first year info design students. And just like you said, Jordan, like I'm learning as much from them as I am, hopefully, they are from me. So I feel like as the role as an instructional designer is being open to even learning yourself, because even if you're the instructional designer, you're learning from your audience and empathizing with them even more again. So I really love that.
So like I think it's a skill, and it's something that's really crucial for like instructional designers and teachers, professors, is just to be open to learn from other people, especially because like like we are now, and we've been in the field or we've had some sort of experiences. We even in our learning environments, we've had experiences, right? And we're not experts, but we are able to share what we've learned with our profs, with our and I think that's one of the things that ties into if somebody's not an expert in a specific subject, being open to absorbing everything. And I think that's like a skill and something that is really beneficial to have all throughout your life. Like, I don't think anyone, even if you were like, you had your PhD or whatever, you've done hours and hours of learning and you've just become an expert in just being a part of that field. I don't think that there's ever a point where you're like, well, I'm topped up on knowledge. I'm done. I know everything I need to know, because
That's so true.
we're always learning and things are always changing. So being open to things, I think there's like a flexibility to being a subject matter expert is, you don't know everything, but you can continue to grow that knowledge.
It ties in with empathy as well, since if you're like an instructional designer who doesn't have like this level of knowledge yet, I think it's important to be able to step in other people's shoes and like be with them through through the learning process. So in a way you're learning as you go with other people. In a way you're
Yeah.
also like a student as well, while being like a facilitator and like a instructional designer. It's about like that learning process with being like open to other people and how they learn as they go.
Sense of like comfort knowing that like you're also in like a similar boat to the people who are learning, because like I don't know, like if you think about I feel like when we're teenagers we all felt like we knew like everything. We were all like, yeah, there's nothing else to learn. And like look at the time since then of what you've learned, and it's just insane. So it's like you could never stop learning. There's so much more, even in the next year, that we'll know versus now. It's just, you have to just stay open to it.
It's important to like take into account their needs and like their learning abilities as well. To be more aware of that too. What does your ideal classroom or learning space look like? What does it have in it? Who does it have in it? Having empathy and like being more aware of like other people's perspectives and like experiences and like learning abilities. I think that's an
Yeah.
important thing to like take into account in like the classroom setting.
Ideal classroom would be collaborative, much like our like design dungeon classes, and
Yeah.
we're like brainstorming together and giving each other like constructive criticism. So above all, it would be collaborative, as well as like we mentioned before, like empathy is like we mentioned this so many times, but empathy is huge because like we said earlier, like we can learn from everyone else. So my ideal classroom would have people of all different backgrounds, different abilities, just to learn more from others. And that's why I really love our program in particular, because it's like at the core of it, we're learning from each other. I think
That's true.
my ideal prof would be empathetic as well as responsive to the students' concerns. So I love when profs are like responsive to students' concerns about COVID, about life responsibilities, because we all know that horror story of a prof where they claim like they know everything, just like you said, Amanda. So I think that's what my ideal space would be like. Oh, and additionally, making space for quiet people too, because in small groups, I can be myself and share my perspective like somewhat clearly, but then in a classroom, I just like freeze up and might not even say a single thing. So I think making space for quiet people as an instructional designer too is super
I
important.
really like that point
great.
because I feel like I agree with like everything you just said. Like that's what I would love to have mine. But the quiet for quiet kids was it's just, I feel like that's so important because like it is literally almost like traumatizing for some kids to like have to speak and like have that participation mark where it's worth like 10 to 15%. And it's like if you don't talk, then you're not getting that mark. It's like, how do you expect this person who like comes in and like therefore they literally can't even like they're just going to take a loss of those marks because they can't speak and you're going to take that away from them and like make them feel even worse about themselves. I don't know, that is like I feel like such like a good topic to bring into it, and I feel like that's something that really needs to be like looked at like in future like in the future with classrooms.
I didn't even think about introverts and like taking them into consideration. My previous boss, she was a hard extrovert. She was the person that was on the tables, like yelling at people at conferences. Like she loves that. And because she was such an extrovert and she was managing a team with, I'd say, one extrovert and then 5 or 6 introverts, she just didn't know how to interact. And she read the book Quiet by Susan Cain. If you haven't read it, it's a fantastic read. But she had to read that book to understand how to support her team and understand their needs so that she could be a better manager and not force them to do things that they weren't comfortable with. Because especially like in the workplace and in schools, like being extroverted is very like it's kind of a requirement because schools, you got presentations, which I think there's a benefit to pushing people out of their comfort zones, but at what point do we like kind of like figure out how can we support these people without, I don't know, but it's that element of taking into consideration how other people interact and feel comfortable interacting. And how do you guys feel like to tie into the ideal classroom and learning space, how do you feel about group projects?
I think it's like hit or miss because obviously you need to learn how to work in a like a group for like the working world. And like I know some people like group work can be like a struggle for them as well, and they like that is like the last thing they want to do.
Because I really love our groups within info design. Like I feel like we're all on the same page with everything. We've learned the whole design process, so we're familiar with iteration and the emphasis on research first and foremost. But I remember specifically working in an internship sprint where it was a multidisciplinary team. So students from like different programs like business, science, and myself in info design. And it was really hard to share ideas because the the internship was based around innovation and entrepreneurship. So I could tell the business students almost like took over or like the leadership piece because it was their forte. It was business and marketing, things that I didn't know, but I also had my info design lens of like failing quickly and constantly iterating. So I feel like making space for those different voices is really important. So I really love that question. Thanks, Annette.
Yeah, it's the same. My perspective on like group projects are it's kind of the same with like Jordan. It's more of like a hit or miss. I really like our group. I think we communicate well. But it's like in my experiences like in the past when I go into like a group like setting and like with my perspective of like doing what I need to do and hoping like other people have the same like that kind of mindset as me. And yeah, it's just like just try to do your best while hoping like other people are on the same page as you.
Also, like a really great opportunity to like one of my biggest regrets about this program is the first year I feel like I was just like kind of ignorant to like my knowledge, and so I just never really like I felt like I guess like I was fine, like I knew what I was doing and I was going to be okay. And I think that I missed out on like the first group project that we did for Kelsey. Like I feel like I missed out on learning from my team as much as I could
Yeah.
have, because if I was like I think that's the benefit that I didn't see back then, was that working in a group, it's a collaborative environment where you can learn from each other and learn those skills that other people have. Because, and I think that I've overlooked that in the past of like group projects give you this benefit, because I'm the type of person that's like group projects. This is a 4-person thing. I'll just do it by myself because like I just like to run and get it done. But
Yeah.
I think I miss like when I have that kind of mentality. Thankfully, like I feel like I've kind of grown out of it. But when I had that mentality, I just overlooked the benefit of working collaboratively and learning from other people on my team.
So if at all, do the ideas about knowledge equity relate to UDL, inclusion and accessibility? How do they relate to indigenous knowledge and decolonization?
I feel like it comes down to like the main point of like empathy again. Just applying that in the way that you can for everyone's different learning styles and the way we obtain knowledge and knowing and everything that goes along with it.
Like knowledge equity relates to UDL and inclusion so much because at the core of it, knowledge equity is decolonizing our knowledge and learning from others, like Amanda said, and including the voices that were excluded in the past and really learning from other people. And accessibility is exactly that, making space for people who might not otherwise be able to contribute. So I feel like decolonization really like challenges those that don't already have that like marginalized lens, I guess you could say.
The similarity is like this. They both have like a holistic approach and like a community based approach to like learning. It's all about like making space and like having like diversity and like inclusion for everyone.
Inclusion and empathy, like I feel like this podcast could be called empathy because we talk about it every week. But it's such a big part of learning, and knowledge equity and taking into account everybody else's experiences and building off of them for the greater good is just, I don't know, empathy's the big driver there for me.